For me, curiosity is one of the most underrated skills. I think about my own career and you constantly reinvent yourself. I went to university, I learned .NET development. I learned Swift. I learned how to program your different languages. I then developed leadership skills. I started developing finance skills when I was running my own business, and then HR skills. You're constantly learning new things, right? And that's just a given of kind of where you are. And I think that the skill of just being curious and asking questions unlocks so many opportunities and so many doors. Just understanding why. It opens up opportunities and avenues just by you're linking with people, talking to people, asking questions.
Steve, welcome to Our Change Shift Happens. I couldn't be more excited to have you here. Couple of reasons. I think the first one is to have the Director of Engineering and Architecture for one of the largest organisations in the UK. The organisations that you've been involved with are at the cutting edge of technology innovation, and they impact the consumer in a really critical and meaningful way, certainly the products that your company delivers today. So interested to hear your approach to innovation in that sector. I think, as we just said a moment ago before we started, the importance of a leader leaving the door open behind them, sharing honestly and candidly their experience, the lessons that they've learned, how they approach their work and their view of the world today. It's so important. And I think how the world is changing, both receiving technology, but just change in general has a connotation. And I think the importance of hearing the views of people in your position is incredibly important. But as I start every episode, when you were 15 or 16, in the library or the careers office, did you set out and want to be a technology leader in so many years' time?
First of all, really good to be here, Will. Thank you very much for inviting me along. That's a really interesting question because when I was 15 or 16, I had a massive dilemma as to what I wanted to do with my career. And I was always very interested in tech, and IT was always one of the avenues that I wanted to explore. But I was also a musical theatre buff, and I really wanted to be in the theatre.
Okay.
So when I was going through my GCSEs, I was doing drama and performing arts and all of those sorts of things. And I was also doing IT and tech. And I remember actually at 15 or 16, as I was starting to pick my A-levels and kind of think about where I was going to kind of go to, I remember thinking, where do I go? And it was always described by my parents as it's your head and your heart. My heart always said I wanted to be in musical theatre, and my head said, that's not going to make any money. You're quite good in tech. So I finished my A-levels, and I did an A-level in performing arts. And then obviously I was looking at university and kind of where to go. And thankfully, looking back, because I've since discovered that I can't sing, dance, or act. Although I do have an A-level in dance, which looking at me, you would never believe in a million years. I decided to go down the IT route, and I applied to a number of universities to go into that direction. But I think even then, when I was looking at IT and tech, what I had in my head was I wanted to go into a network management role. So I had this idea that I wanted to be a network manager of a large computer network, maybe in a school or a college or a university. And I couldn't really see beyond that as to what other roles there were in tech. And it really took me until probably second or even third year in university to realize that tech is this amazingly vibrant and dynamic field that has all sorts of different ways you can go into. And actually, for me, infrastructure engineering and network management and all of those sorts of things isn't really that interesting. It's not actually where the cutting edge of tech is. Yeah. But it took me a real long time to realize that and to understand it. And I think that's because when I was at school, when you were thinking about what tech was and what computers were, all you really saw was the computers you had in the classroom or the computers that you were using every day, and the person who was there who was supporting and managing them. I hadn't really given any thought to what lay beyond that. And also, if you look at the way the tech industry has developed over the last 30 years or so, it's went into areas that I don't think anybody would have believed possible. Back in when I was doing my A-levels. I mean, I was reading just the other day, Google was born in 1998.
Yes, we're older than Google.
Exactly. So literally, I am older than Google.
You're older than Google too.
Yeah, which is mad. And so I was doing my A-levels in 2002, 2003.
Yeah.
So literally at that point, Google was 4 or 5 years old, something like that. You know, it was very, very early on.
1998, I think.
And if you think back then, you know, iPhones didn't exist. You didn't really have your smartphones in your life. Your technology was a very different proposition when I was going through college. So I think that to see how tech has developed over the last 20 or 30 years is tremendous. And I think that has really opened my eyes to what the possibilities of tech are that I simply wouldn't have realised back in the day.
So went to university, was it a computer-based degree?
Yes. So I went to Chester University
Yeah.
and I studied computer science.
Okay.
And it was actually computer science network communication systems because
So you really were.
I was really dead set on networks. And then I considered at the end of my second year, I considered whether I wanted to change my my degree so it would have been internet technologies or something.
Okay.
Or whether it would be straight computer science. And in the end, I kind of figured it didn't really matter because the degree had elements of all of those components kind of within it. Did it really matter what the name of the degree was on my certificate? The key was that I had a degree. But I think by the time I kind of came out of university, I'd really realised that your networks probably wasn't where my future lay.
Yeah.
Not least because of all the maths that kind of went behind working out IP addresses and subnet ranges and all of those sorts of things.
I had a colleague, a head of IT, send me a list of long-running queries and my brain spazzed out. It literally spazzed out. I was like, don't ever do that again. So now he's like, we need to sort this, but, can you just help me find a way to get it sorted? Don't look at the file again. It's just awful. But so you went to university, your eyes were opened. Then what happened? What's the next step?
So it was actually during university, really. So I took a year out in the middle of university. I was elected Students' Union president. So I took a true sabbatical in the middle of my degree. And I got to, as part of that sabbatical year, I became the student representative on all of the university committees and helped to really understand and see how the university operated and how the university worked. And I guess that really opened my eyes to a broader spectrum of opportunity in terms of what technology could do, how technology was enabling the university, and where it was driving to. And at the time, tuition fees had just been introduced in the UK. So I was very fortunate. I was in one of the last groups of students to go to university without paying tuition fees.
Right.
But we just introduced £3,000 tuition fees, and then obviously subsequently £9,000 tuition fees. And the big question that the university leadership was asking at the time is, how do we give some value add back to students while they're still studying? And a couple of senior lecturers had come up with this idea that why don't we get students working with businesses? So businesses need websites, businesses need databases built, they need CRM systems. And many businesses either can't afford those sorts of things. It's potentially a value add, something additional that kind of isn't part of their core business. How do we connect the skill sets that our students have got back to these businesses? And there was some government schemes around at the time that offered some grants to local businesses to spend with academic institutions. And we basically created this entity. It was called the Informatics Centre, which is a very academic sounding word, that would work with local businesses to provide something of value. So it might be a website, a database, a CRM system, whatever it might be. The idea was to employ students to do the work. That would give students some industry experience alongside their studying. And at the same time, the business would get some value out of it at the other end. So because of my students' union experience and the inroads I had with university management, the leadership and whatever, I guess I started agitating a little bit and just pointing out some of the problems with the model, because although businesses weren't contributing a vast amount of money to this, there was still cash involved and they were still paying to do some work and expected some value for it. And as soon as cash is on the table, suddenly you expect things to be delivered on time by a deadline, that the project is managed in some way. And if the student, it's not like an assignment where the student's ill, doesn't deliver on time, we can just forget about it. There's a need to actually make sure that we're delivering this thing.
And this was in the role of student union president.
So it was getting towards the end of my presidency and into my third year. So I finished the president. I went back to my third year, and this kind of thing was all kind of emerging. Yeah. And over the course of my third year, I basically persuaded the university that if they were going to do this, they needed to employ somebody to run it. So they gave me a job.
And who better?
And so I became the informatics centre manager. And I had a team of students that we would employ that came and obviously worked with us. And we would do a whole series of projects, and for a whole range of different businesses.
Yeah.
I remember working for things like the tattoo aftercare company, developing an e-commerce site to create tattoo aftercare products. And there was another company called Alentius that were like a psychometric testing company that needed a platform to allow people to kind of fill out psychometric testing kind of things. They could do their analysis and things.
It's all sort of left field,
All sorts of different collection of things.
Sort of like a hyperscaler, but from a university perspective.
Exactly,
I absolutely love
exactly
that. Yeah.
that. And it was kind of like a startup within the university. And although we didn't make vast amount of money, it still turned over.
It had revenue.
Money. It had revenue.
More money than before, where there was no money. Yeah.
And I, over 2.5 years after my degree, we kind of built this thing, and I guess that I personally realised that this was something which actually had legs, and profit, if I can call it that. It wasn't really a profit; it was more the surplus we were kind of generating. Was definitely more than the university were paying me for a salary, and it wasn't all going back to the students. And and I was young and kind of ambitious, and kind of thought, well, actually, why am I not just doing this for myself and kind of running my own business? So the offshot of that was that I left the university, and I set up my own business. And that was really kind of where my interest in tech really started. When I really started understanding the business outcomes that could be delivered through technology and what it could do for local business.
And so, if we now at this point got a wider appreciation than networking and infrastructure.
100%. By the time I got to this point, I'd really realized the transformational nature of the internet. And I mean, right around this time, the iPhone was launched. So the iPhone was revolutionary.
Yeah.
In 2007 when Steve Jobs announced that. I'm a total Apple fanboy. I've got no hesitation saying that even today.
If you open any of these drawers, you'll see iPhones and watches and everything else.
Exactly.
We love it.
So love an iPhone, love Apple products.
Which is actually unusual for a techie, because most engineers that I know, they absolutely rip me for having an iPhone. They're like, oh, you have to have an Android, don't you?
I think it depends.
Apple, you can't even do anything with it.
Very much the type of engineer you're talking to. That's a whole different conversation. But the iPhone had been launched, and throughout university, I'd learned how to program.
Yeah.
I really got a passion for true engineering and for building software product. And then when the iPhone came out, suddenly I realized that you could build apps for phones and put apps into people's hands. And I got really excited by that. And I remember actually in the run up to the launch of the App Store, I don't think I made day one. I think it was day 2 or 3. But I had an app in the App Store on launch day.
Wow.
It's no longer alive now. It was an awful app. But it was
a great idea at the time.
It was a great idea at the time. It was going to make my fortune and do all sorts of things. I'd really got into iPhone application development, and that was the gap that I saw when I started my business. It was this thing that everybody had an app idea, and at the time, I mean, everybody that you spoke to, was very excited about this concept of an app and what an app could do. And every business was like, my business needs an app, and I've got a great idea for an app, and I can sell my app and I can make millions. And you had all of the early examples of things like Flappy Birds, where they turned your local founders into millionaires by launching your very simple games. So my business was focused on iPhone application development,
right?
And in particularly developing what I would say is early prototypes. The idea was someone would come along and say, "Hey, I've got an idea for an app." We would build a prototype of the app, and the idea being you could then take that app and go and pitch for seed funding or investment or whatever you wanted to do to go and try and sell your idea. So I ran that business over a period of about 5 years, and at the end of it, we had effectively a Scrum team for hire. So I had about 10 staff working for me.
Right.
And we were working in this model where you would come in, we'd have a bit of an incubator, we'd ideate, we'd do some design thinking for you. Yeah. We'd produce an app, a working prototype that was on the App Store that you could work. There was some of your systems that were just live and kind of working. And it worked really well for a number of years. I think that the focus on apps at the time was very opportune in terms of where the market was. We did quite a lot of work with schools. So at the time, the education curriculum was evolving to include the concept of computing. So we would go into some local schools and run workshops, and get kids to develop their own ideas for apps and kind of understand the concept and what's it's behind. And for a number of schools, we actually got the kids to effectively create and write the app, and we got their app onto the App Store. So they could then go home and get their parents would download it and their grandparents would download it, and it'd become mini enterprise project. So if you're charging 69p for an app and you get maybe 100 downloads or so, that's made 30 or 40 quid, and the kids all go have a picnic. It demonstrates the value of enterprise in the local school. So we did a lot of things like that. So what I really understood the transformational nature of technology, I also really started to appreciate how difficult it was to take a vision as a leader and impart that vision on others around you.
Okay.
And yourselves from starting a small business and kind of growing and scaling, how difficult it is to move in those sorts of directions. So it was a very challenging time, particularly towards the end of the process, or towards the end of the company.
Can I ask, how do you deal with that emotionally? Because I think when you start, so we started, we went to a pitch yesterday, and we had a fairly large company, and some of what we were saying before, they needed a level of confidence around where we were, and delighted to say that we can now, we are living towards our vision. There's some evidence to suggest that we're doing the right things, and some of those trigger points have happened, and we've set new ones, we're moving towards those. But right at the beginning, you are at zero, and you have either written it on a wall, or in my case, in a notepad in a coffee shop not too far from here, and it's a bit daunting. And then you have to go out and try and convince a few other people that you're not mad, that how you're going to behave in good times is a certain way, but also you're not going to change in bad times. What you believe may have merit, and that you're capable of bringing a group of people together to deliver that. There's a lot of emotional weight. Forget the commercial bit for a minute. How do you deal with that? Because it's tough. Well, I think it can be really difficult.
It's massively difficult, and I learned a lot about myself in that whole process.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'll come back to your question, but but Foot Squeak ended. It failed.
Right.
That's the reality. I overstretched the company. I employed too many people.
Yeah.
And we weren't bringing in enough revenue to cover the cost.
Yeah.
That was the bottom line. We failed as a company. And it's hard. I mean, I had literally for 5 years of my life poured my soul into this business. Every waking hour of every minute of every day was spent building the company. And I got myself to a position where I had a number of staff. I was responsible for 5 mortgages. With people who were buying houses and running lives and doing those things. And I was the provider that was kind of sitting behind all of this. That's kind of what you are as the business owner. You're the provider that's looking after and doing. And I found myself in a world where I had a very strong belief in terms of what our core product was, which was this incubator app development startup idea. And that worked really well and did bring in some revenue. But suddenly you're in a world where people are coming in and they're pitching an idea to you for an app, and you're thinking to yourself, that's an awful idea. That is never going to work. Why would you ever put that onto the App Store? Do not do this. Do not invest any more time, energy, money, or anything into your product. And you're sitting there going, but the sprint they're going to pay us for is worth 10 grand. And here you are, you're literally struggling to make ends meet to make your payroll at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And you're reconciling that in your head of, am I here to sell, to make money for the company? And, and you're willing to spend this money to do this work, to build this product that is going to fail because it's such a bad idea. Or, am I going to sit here and have the honest conversation with you and go, this is not the right thing for you to be doing for these very valid reasons? And I found myself very conflicted throughout that whole process. And it was such a difficult thing to reconcile and to work with. And I mean, in the end, I didn't. I mean, one of the reasons that the company failed was because I had a word with myself and said, look, you can't sell stuff you don't believe in. That just doesn't work. I also discovered I wasn't a very good salesman. That's
I was going to say, to me, you're selling the service. Like if I came along and was like, I desperately want to build this app, and you were like, that's a terrible idea. I'd be like, who asked you? Build me my app.
And I guess, but that's the thing about partnership. Am I here to partner with you, or am I here to drive the company? So ultimately, it was very hard, and I think that's the answer to your question. And I don't really think I found the answer to it. But I think coming through that whole process, I learned an incredible amount about myself. I also learned an incredible amount about leadership and also an incredible amount about technology and how technology and leadership intersects, and also about how you drive business outcomes and where you choose to go to and how you choose to to deliver your value back to end consumers. Which looking back on that whole experience now, I wouldn't change any of it for the world. It was a phenomenal experience, and I think actually for everybody involved, we all walked away from it. We all survived. Everybody got paid the money they were owed. Ultimately, it wasn't a catastrophic failure.
Ending,
it wasn't a bad ending, but it was still the ending of my baby. And that was a massive turning point in my life, really, in terms of where I, for the first time, had to face into say I'd failed. I mean, I'd never, I'd always had really good exam results. I'd had really good GCSE results. I had a really good vision. And there was a day when I had to bring a bunch of people into a room and say, can't make payroll this month. And that's tough.
It is really tough. And I think it's amazing that, you've come on this podcast, a very public forum, and named a specific failure, because we always do ask the question, have you ever failed? And I suppose that would be your response, like, yes. And you've also, very astutely given us kind of what you've learned from it, and how you look at that, how you reflect on that failure now. But do you remember a time when you sat there and thought, oh God, actually, it's okay? Like, did you, or a time where you forgave yourself for that particular, talk us through that. Like, what was it that made you think, you know what, that was really bad at the time, but actually not that bad?
I mean, sitting here looking back on it now, it really wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, in terms of who I am now and the role that I'm doing, I would not be doing the role I'm doing now had I not had that experience and kind of been through that failure. I think the point that I really realised that it was okay was probably when I joined Boots. So Foot Squeak failed. We couldn't make payroll. We brought everybody in, sat everybody down. And I found myself, I needed a job. At that point in my life, I just needed a stable income. And we'd done some work with a company up the road, and I knew their managing director. And I remember sitting in his office talking to him, and he was a small digital agency, and they had a project that had just come in, and they didn't really know how they were going to deliver it. They didn't have the people, didn't have the skills to kind of do. And I'd sat in his office and I'd literally, explained all of this, horrendous this is kind of going on. And he said, come and contract with me if you want. Come and deliver this project and do this thing. And I remember being so incredibly grateful to him. I went and joined, and also some people that have worked with Footsqueak had come across with us to the company. I was also in a position where I retained some residual revenue from kind of Footsqueak as a result of the contract to the clients. So immediately that happened.
Yeah.
We'd had the failure, and immediately, that there was a way that I manufactured to kind of to exit in a sensible way. So the world really hadn't ended and hadn't kind of fallen apart. And I went and worked with Polymorph for 3 years and delivered some awesome projects and things with obviously people I've been working with. And then the real turning point came because they won a contract with the European Union to develop a system for the Seychelles government.
Oh, wow.
Which was all about helping the nations of the Seychelles and Indian Ocean region to communicate with each other on issues to do with piracy, as in sort of who are pirates or the patch up.
Wow.
Suez Canal goes from the Indian Ocean up to Europe. The European Union's really interested in protecting the Suez Canal because that's the main shipping lane coming through. And it turns out what happens is the pirates hang out at the entrance to the Suez Canal and they basically attack the ships. And all of the countries in the Indian Ocean haven't got particularly mature IT processes and tech systems and things to kind of to support communication. So the European Union...
Not even a walkie-talkie.
So the European Union had identified some money to create a system to allow these countries and these naval forces to communicate better with each other.
Okay.
So there was some instant chat, there was some mapping functionality. It connected to a system called Vision, which had all the mapping data from the US, the port ship locations in. And we built this system that allowed different countries to log onto this site and plot the locations of ships and send chat messages and share data and share forms and all of these sorts of things. So I got to scale a team. I got to scale a team to build that over a reasonable period of time. I got to go out to the Seychelles.
Worst places to go on a business trip.
I think that was really where I really started to understand what a product organization needed to be, and where you really started to understand what the business need was and what the user was trying to achieve. Because to your point, yes, they did have walkie-talkies, but that is what they had. That was the alternative.
Yeah.
So you're moving your people from a world where you're saying, rather than using your walkie-talkie, is there a more efficient way to collect this data? Is there a more secure way of doing it? And that also opened up all sorts of regulatory implications around how you secure systems at scale, how you make sure that your vulnerabilities are well managed, that you've got a good risk management posture, all of that experience around that. Because you're certainly working with a governmental organisation, you suddenly had to face into a lot of these types of challenges and problems.
And you were in a leadership role,
and I was, yeah. So I was head of .NET development.
Right. Okay.
Was the role that I ultimately landed in.
And just a quick question. So are you a .NET developer yourself?
By background. So originally through university, I was a .NET engineer. That's kind of where I kind of learned to code. Did a bit of VB, bit of Java. And then obviously as I went into iOS, when Apple was released, very much Objective-C, and then obviously Swift came about. So I learned and developed Swift. Latterly, JavaScript is obviously where a lot of that where my tech stack's kind of developed to. Although sadly I don't get to do anywhere near as much hands-on code today as I used to, but I still do enjoy it. So, but my core skill set was .NET. So so we built this application as a .NET application. And obviously launched it with the Seychelles. So I built and scaled this team, ran this program, really successful program, delivered some amazing outcomes for the Seychelles. I mean, the system is still used by those countries and still continues to be developed. But then that program was coming towards a close, and what I thought it was at the time, the funding was coming towards an end, and it was very uncertain whether the money was there. So I was looking for, well, what's the next job? Where does Steve go next? And by that point, I'd successfully navigated the exit of my company. All the people that I had were safe and secure and moved on. I kind of recovered financially because I was back into actually earning money again, which was a really important thing. And I was looking for a new role, and I was just Googling around different options where I might want to go. And an opportunity came up to go and work for Boots as an engineering manager. So a recruiter, got on the phone to me. We started talking, and I ended up going to Boots. And I joined them initially as a senior engineering manager, and then very quickly I think we realised that Boots didn't really have an in-house engineering team. Everything was outsourced, and I became head of engineering, and we started building an internal engineering team, and taking Boots on their transformation journey.
Can you give us some size and scale? Because we've all been to Boots. Everyone who listens to this podcast is going to have been to Boots. What does it look like from a technology perspective over the course? Because you've, I think, in 3 sentences, said you became head of engineering. That is an enormous...
Yeah, it was a big step. Yeah. I think, first of all, I think this probably applies to a lot of retailers. Yeah. And I think this is particularly relevant given what's recently happened with M&S and Co-op and the cyber attacks. A lot of retailers historically have outsourced their technology to people who know how to do technology well.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of SI partners who have built their business on supporting organizations like Boots to deliver tech at scale. And that kind of makes sense because you kind of think about the Boots leadership. They're not a digital company. No. They're a retailer. They're a shop. That's what their core business proposition is. We as Boots, we don't know how to build software. We put products into stores. We do beauty. We do pharmacy. That's what our core business is. We don't need to develop the competency of tech. But then you realize that Boots.com is by far and away the largest shop that Boots has.
Yeah.
It is turning over 50x, 100x what the nearest, your largest store is turning over. And actually, the opportunity that digital provides an organization like Boots in terms of growth is huge. So suddenly, actually, this tech organization that you have at Boots is really meaningful to the bottom line, to the profitability of the organization. And I think at the time that I joined, that had been recognized and was realized by the organization. But they were in a world where, historically they had bought off-the-shelf products.
Okay.
So at the time, WebSphere Commerce was their website. And it was WebSphere Commerce version 7.8, which was a monolithic e-commerce store. And that had been customized, it had been added to, it had been stretched, it had been in every way imaginable to do what Boots needed to do in order to drive revenue. And I guess this is the same as so many organizations. There's nobody makes bad decisions in organizations, but decisions over time become stale or lead to legacy systems, legacy code. And that causes a challenge. How do you manage that legacy infrastructure and modernize the tech stack? So we were in this world where people had been talking to everybody around composable architecture, about microservices, about moving to a more modern tech stack. The cloud had suddenly burst onto the scene,
right, okay.
And everyone's trying to migrate to the cloud and leverage that, and they want flexibility and they want agility, and you're in a world where you've got periodic release cycles of Boots, which are running once every 6 to 9 months. We would do a release onto Boots.com at the point I joined.
Oh wow!
We worked with Boots, and modernize how they did stuff. We moved to monthly release cycles, and I mean in today's world where I sit in my organization where we're doing CI/CD, true CI/CD, release on demand. It sounds alien to say you can only release on Boots.com once a month.
Yeah,
but that is the reality.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these large organizations are facing, because the risk management process. If Boots.com goes offline, the amount of revenue that Boots is losing every second that site is down is huge. And I remember in my first or second week, they'd done a release and there was an incident on Boots.com, and it had stopped trading. And we weren't taking orders, and it was the middle of the day. It must have been in April or May time, so it wasn't quite peak season, but we were doing a lot of trade, and obviously everyone's swarming around the issue, and you've got some lady there who is literally telling you minute by minute how much revenue Boots.com has lost at this point in time. And I remember thinking to myself, how
what's going to drive
from a leadership point of view, I understand we're losing revenue. But is that pressure actually helping or hindering the team in finding the solution to get the website back up online? So from that regard, it's a high pressure environment where we have to keep trading. We have to make sure where the lights are on and all of those things are done. There's definitely pressure on the business, as every retailer has, to make money and to make sure we're growing and we're achieving our targets, all of those things. That means that our business is really interested in making sure that we've got new features, new things on Boots.com that's going to drive that revenue. So there's a constant thought process around that. But we're also in this world where we've got lots of supplier contracts at play in how we deliver the work that we do.
Right.
And certainly at the time I joined, I don't think the right thinking had necessarily been done around how Boots and the supplier needed to work together in order to deliver the right outcome for the business. And that was really the journey that I went on with Boots. It was really understanding how a product organization needed to work with an engineering organization in order to deliver that value at scale, and how to scale those teams. And I was really fortunate actually during my tenure there to be able to experiment quite a lot with how team structures worked and how team structures operated, how supplier relationships could be matured and evolved in order to get maximum value out of those relationships, so that we all work together for the intended outcome that we're trying to deliver. And I think it's something that a lot of organizations definitely struggle with, because setting a engineering organization up to be able to deliver value at pace has to be done incredibly intentionally. And I think particularly in project-based cultures where organizations often fund the project or the thing rather than the product that we're building, it's often difficult to reconcile the implications, the dependencies, the ways the projects need to work together. And it's amazing how much effect the contractual negotiations have on the end delivery. The amount of times I've been in calls where someone has said, we are contracted to deliver this number of story points or this number of things. Therefore, we must do this. And the behaviors that are driven in teams by the contract, I think, is often very, very misunderstood. and often has negative consequences on organisations.
Yeah, I think that's
a challenge.
Really interesting point, because obviously, you talk about this Boots transformation in the sense of a 10-year period, right? But and you would have tackled each one of those things at some point during that 10-year journey. What I see happening a lot is you go in, there's a very limited transformation period that you have to, it's either a turnaround or it's an acquisition or it's a divestment, and you have to kind of, change everything from structures to culture to the way that teams are measured. Sometimes they're not at all. And so you have to introduce some of these things. And then there's a whole kind of theoretical debate around exactly what you've just said, story points. Well, how do you, what is a story point and how do you measure it? And what does it really even tell you? When fundamentally...
And the answer is nothing, by the way.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But what you're really getting to is, in order to be able to make the teams work together better, I mean, that's really the outcome that you're after, right? It's work together better, more efficiently, doing the right things at the right time, rather than, this product owner shouted yesterday and I have to now fit that into my sprint. So you have some sort of order to the way things are being delivered and for the right business outcome. I think that bit is something that a lot of people really, really struggle with. Absolutely. Especially if you're sitting there in that kind of, project management team or a product role where you're just trying to get your stuff prioritized onto the roadmap and things like that. So do you have any insights around where you've seen it being done super, super well? Insights could mean anything from, well, we've structured our tech team so that it's completely end-to-end, full stack team towards one product, or actually in sometimes, we know that that's not possible because what you have is like web development, mobile development, shared service type teams where you have to do like more of a project management approach, and they might have several different product masters. Could give us a little bit more of like a view as to what you think works really well and how you would do it if you had to do it all over again.
Let me talk in the context of my current organisation, because what you've described
Shall we
is
get there? Yeah.
literally the journey that we've been on at Haleon. So I left Boots.
Yeah.
And so I was at Boots all through the pandemic, and I had a wonderful time at Boots. I think we achieved some great things. I think the organisation did some great work.
Did you roll out the Advantage card? Sorry, did you guys? Was it?
Yeah. Our teams were running
Brilliant, loved it. Yeah,
our teams running the Advantage card, which is a phenomenally interesting thing to run, by the way. I think so. The amount of data and what you can do with that data.
As a result
of Advantage card.
I've only just come awake to that point. All I care about is the fact that I've got 70 quid to spend on something in Boots at the moment.
So I was at Boots all throughout pandemic, and actually delivered some of the best things that we had done in pandemic. I mean, so going back to that risk aversion of the organisation, periodic releases, 6 to 8 months, we went to monthly releases. I remember when pandemic hit, we launched a chatbot in boots.com because when pandemic hit, the call center volumes went through the roof,
sure,
right? As every organization experienced. And as a result of that, the big business need was, how do we handle this volume of calls in a socially distanced way so that we're all on the same, so we can manage all of our customers and help? Because suddenly we are the nation's, 4th or 5th emergency service, because, if people need help, they can't get their doctor, they can't get their pharmacy, they're all dealing with COVID, who do you call? You call Boots. That's kind of where you go. So we built a chatbot in 5 days and got it live on boots.com inside 5 days, which was just phenomenal. The speed with which that was suddenly achieved. And another great example from the pandemic was that we had a huge surge in orders on boots.com, as you'd expect, right? Yeah. So suddenly, if I think about peak volumes would be Black Friday. So that's obviously towards the end of November. And pandemic hit, I think it was in the March. And there was 7 consecutive days in March where we had order volumes that were larger than the previous Black Friday that we'd had in November. So, now, and to put that into context, Boots spent 6 months every year getting ready to handle Black Friday. Yeah. And this is not just a technology change. This is about, the warehouse. How do we make sure that orders coming in can get routed, can get delivered, can get people out the door? For Black Friday, the warehouses are resourced up with extra staff to obviously make sure that we can pick and pack off the shelves and get products out of the door. And suddenly you're in a world where you're told you've got to socially distance in the warehouse, and you haven't resourced up for the staff, and your consecutive days order volume is larger than your previous Black Friday. How do you deal with that? So we turned around something that we called hybrid stores. So all of your out-of-town locations were obviously closing because they were no longer working. So we started to route Boots.com orders. Rather than send them to the central Burton warehouse, we started to route them to individual store locations around the country. We got really clever towards the end of it and started routing them towards last mile delivery. So you're picking and packing from a store closest to your house. And that was obviously shortening the mile and probably having a positive impact on carbon footprint and all of those sorts of things. That was turned around, I think it was in a space of around maybe 14, 15 days or something, to go from that not being a thing to suddenly this now exists in Boots. So we did some amazing work during pandemic. And then it got towards the end of pandemic and Boots were very much on a drive to get people back to the office and kind of back into office locations for actually very good reasons. I think as we kind of look at how that's kind of matured, there was definitely a need to bring people together. But I'd moved back to Chester during pandemic.
Yeah,
I actually locked down with my mum for 2 years. And as Boots were trying to drive everyone back to the office, that's not where my head was at. And I quite liked this idea of working from home and having more flexibility, which I never thought I would say, by the way. That wasn't where I was at all. So I was looking for a job, and I ended up talking to Haleon, or at the time GSK Consumer Healthcare. And they were just about to separate Haleon from the GSK mothership in July 2022. Tiny dip in the ocean in terms of the overall size of where GSK was. So consumer healthcare was being separated out as a standalone company. And for folks who haven't heard of Haleon, by the way, so we own Sensodyne, Panadol, Advil, lots of consumer healthcare type brands. And they were looking for a global head of engineering to go and help them to modernize some of their tech stack and to really think about the consumer proposition. So I joined Haleon with the intent of building a global engineering team. And I think GSK historically had relied very heavily on third-party vendors. Very similar story to kind of where Boots was. And I think the organization had recognized the need to have more internal accountability for its engineering and technical efforts. So I joined Haleon with the intent of driving that, probably not expecting actually that I would spend the first 12 to 18 months separating the company. When you land in an organization that's about to separate from a global organization like GSK, and you realize there's well in excess of 250 individual systems that have to be literally separated, stood up again from scratch. You've got all the data agreements, everything's got to be it's got to be independently and run in its own environment. The monumental effort of doing that separation cannot be understated in terms of the amount of time and effort that took. So arriving at GSK/Haleon, I was very much pulled into this world of separation, as everybody was at the time.
Was that the first kind of separation that you've done?
Yeah. No, certainly not at that scale. It was and a phenomenal thing to witness actually, and kind of see how an organisation organises well around such a mammoth task like that. So coming out of separation, we then started to really think about transformation and how we want to set the organisation up for the future. And what we've done is we've restructured internally to create something that we now call commercial technology.
Okay.
And commercial technology is really the consumer-facing function of Haleon. So we talk about customers, consumers, and experts. So a customer is Boots, Walgreens, Walmart. They sell our products for us. A consumer is you or I. We use Sensodyne, and you buy it off the shelf, and we're the end recipients of the goods. Expert is really, really interesting in our context. So an expert would be somebody like a doctor or a dentist or a pharmacist.
Okay.
So the commercial tech function faces off to customers, consumers, and experts, and really looks at how we activate the consumer proposition and how we drive consumer lifetime value. So let me return to your question.
Yeah.
How have we set this up for success in terms of what we've created? And I think one of the big shifts that I've had in my own thinking. I'm a technologist by background. I'm an engineer. That's where I spend a lot of my my headspace is in the tech. And one of the things that I've really come to learn and to value through Haleon is switching that perspective and looking consumer first, and really understanding what it is we're trying to drive from the consumer's perspective. What does the end-to-end journey look like from the consumer?
Yeah.
And one of the challenges we've had at Haleon is that historically everything has been point project funded. So we've got lots of systems that have been developed over time that are developing this proposition, that proposition, the other proposition, delivering out to a particular group of users or whatever. And one of the big shifts that we've made within our commercial tech function is we've really started to think horizontally across the whole of the consumer journey. So if you are a pharmacist coming to Haleon, what are your touch points across the whole of that journey, and how do those touch points interrelate to each other? How do they work in relation to each other to create that holistic journey experience? Once you've understood that journey, you can then start to map your technology onto that journey, and also understand where you've got duplication of technology and where you can merge capabilities together. You can understand, well, what capabilities do we need? What maturity do we want in our capabilities, and how does that need to work? This is where you start to consider things like, if I think about identity as a really easy example. So you want to be able to log into a system once with one username and password. You don't want to have 10 different usernames and passwords depending on which system you're logging into. So you want to create one capability that's built once and reused many times, rather than building your multiple capabilities that do the same thing. So we've really taken first of all, a consumer first led approach, and then mapped the technology onto that and really understood where capabilities need to be mapped against that journey. And then that is what then informs your team structure that sits underneath that.
Okay.
And I equate it a lot to, there's a fantastic book by Eric Evans from the late 90s called Domain Driven Design.
Okay.
That folks may have come across. If you haven't, done, it's well worth a read. That talks about core domains, supporting subdomains, and generic subdomains. So a core domain is how we make money. That's a real business driver for us. A generic subdomain is something that we want to leverage. We want to buy off the shelf. So if I give an example, I would say a content management system is a generic subdomain. So, I'm never at Haleon, I would hope, going to build my own content management system. That would be a really stupid thing for me to do. There are lots of them off the shelf. I can buy it. A supporting subdomain is where you're probably leveraging a product, but you need to have some sort of customization on top of it in order to meet the needs of kind of what you're doing. So you might if you have identity, you might have an identity provider kind of sitting behind kind of what you're doing, but you might have built some customized logic on top of it in order to create a capability that works for you internally.
Sure.
But you're not building the whole thing from scratch. You're still leveraging that core product. And what we've done is we've really looked at how our technology blueprint maps against those consumer experiences and then maps against the technology footprint, which then puts me into a world where I can start to equate every technology decision to the business value that it's driving. So we talk about measuring in terms of reach, engagement, and ROI. So they're our core measures. So if I think about the products we're building, is that increasing reach to more consumers? So what you can then start to do is look at your technology stack and say, well, this random infrastructure component, I've got an API gateway down here, and that API gateway is directly affecting these aspects of the consumer journey, and therefore is driving this much value in terms of reach to our business. And that linkage of the technology to the consumer, I think, is incredibly powerful for an organization.
I would agree.
Suddenly when you're going into a business conversation to say, hey, I need some money to invest in this random database thing over here, our business doesn't care about the database technology you're using. Why should they? That's not what they're there for. That's not what the business is trying to drive. But if you can equate that database technology to say that as a result of introducing this, that's going to drive this much more ROI, that becomes really powerful. And it needs to map through the whole stack of your organization. So you have very clearly defined OKRs, your objective key results, which then map directly onto the journey, which maps onto the team structure that you've created, which maps onto the technology stack. And then you can start making individual teams accountable for different aspects of those OKRs and where that's going to drive into. And there's so much detail I could go into around how that creates itself. But I think that the journey we're on at Haleon is probably my example of where I think it's being done really well. But I also think it's something that we're inventing the math on it. So I don't think that we are following a blueprint that some other organization has got. I think we're in a really cool situation actually where we've got some very powerful thought leadership inside the organization that is really coming together to shape how this structure needs to
How
create,
do you
how it needs to
encourage
exist.
that thought leadership, one, to be shared, but two, to grow? Because I think when we are going through a transformation, there's obviously storming, norming, forming in whatever form it happens, right? So you had to realign your tech teams in order to fit the kind of strategic layer of the business proposition. So like during that time, people are going to be disrupted. So how do you encourage that thought leadership? Is there anything that you can share with, mechanisms, whatever kind of tools you use in order to share that, in order to grow that and share it?
So first of all, it comes from leadership and the leadership style you're trying to create. And I think that I am very fortunate in the organisation that I currently work within to have some incredibly enabling and empowering leaders around me who empower me to lead within my organisation. And I think that there's definitely a shift in mentality that's needed. So in traditional organisations, you might have a command and control, or your leader knows best. You're a manager. You're kind of you're doing the work the manager tells you to do. And there's a need to actually flip that whole structure on its head and to say, there's a fantastically famous quote by Steve Jobs of, we don't employ intelligent people to tell them what to do. We employ the intelligent people to tell us what to do. And I think that actually rings incredibly true with me, that I think it's about, saying to your people, this is what the outcome I want to achieve is, and then giving you the ability to go and work out how to deliver that outcome yourselves. Now, that's a really difficult thing to do. One, it's really difficult as a leader, as a manager to let go and to allow that to happen and to trust that will happen. It's also in a large organisation, it's really important and difficult to have the right guardrails around people to make sure that actually you're focused on the right area, the right bounded context, where you haven't got dependencies on other parts of the organisation that slow you down. And I think that's something that, ourselves, and I think every large organisation struggles with, because there's always dependencies on other teams that have to be factored into those challenges. But I think, I talk a lot about autonomy. I talk a lot about how you empower teams, empower individuals, how you allow people to fail and to make mistakes and to say that your mistakes are okay. I'll give you a great example. So we've introduced a thing in my teams recently. It's called Failure of the Month. So we're all on a Teams call, and we actively talk about the biggest failure that we've had in the last month. And we celebrate it and we applaud it and we say, well done for failing. That's a really good thing. And it's such a difficult thing because failure is always seen as a big negative. But actually, provided you learn from failure.
Well, it means you tried, right?
You tried, exactly. You haven't tried. Now, there's a different story if you haven't learned from that failure. If you continually repeat the same mistake, that's a problem. That is definitely a problem. But actually having the space and the air cover from leadership to be allowed to fail, I think is hugely empowering and important in driving everything you're talking about.
I was interested in the cultural shift in the business and how you've taken people on the journey, because there will have presumably, when you arrived, been a group think, a way of doing things, team cohesion that you've broken in order to now deliver in a different way. How have you taken people on the journey to get to where you are now so that you're delivering in that fashion?
So I'm actually going to say that I still think we are still on the journey.
Okay.
I still think that that does exist in our organisation. I don't want to sit here and kind of present this view that we are the perfect organisation that is that's doing everything right, and those challenges don't exist. They do exist, and will continue to exist. There is an importance though about identifying and calling out the behaviour.
Okay.
There's a thing about high performing teams give each other feedback. In the moment feedback, and the people learn from that feedback. So we definitely have developed a very healthy culture where feedback is encouraged and respected.
Okay.
And we actively encourage not just me to give feedback to the team,
Yeah.
I actively take feedback from the team. I'll give you a great example of that. So I run every 6 weeks we have a thing called Team Health Check,
Right.
where all of the teams come in and we talk about not about anything we're delivering. It's more about how the team as a whole is working. So how's our ways of working? What dependencies have we got? What risks we mentioned with the team? How are we developing our people? All of those sorts of things. And one of the things I'd done, I introduced a scorecard. And every 6 weeks, the team has OKRs that they're working towards.
Yeah.
And those OKRs are technical OKRs, so they're all around things like, what's our percentage of automation test coverage, or how many API hits am I getting, or kind of whatever. So it was very technically focused. And one of our services had seen a reduction in the number of users. I think it was a search service. And therefore, I looked at the scorecard and I updated a drag rating and turned it from green to red. This particular thing. And I just did it. Yeah. I saw the scorecard and I went, that's not green, that's red. And suddenly this thing was red and it's all good. And then the scorecard was emailed out to the team and to everybody. Scorecards are all attached. You're looking forward to chatting about them at the next health check. And this team of engineers come in. And then the scorecard comes up on the screen. And one of the engineers, so in terms of our organizational structure, so I sit as like a senior director in the organization, and you then got directors, and you've got engineering managers, and you've got senior engineering managers, and you've got engineers somewhere down here. And you had this engineer that is somewhere in the organization, puts his hand up on Teams, and goes, Steve, I was just really disappointed to learn that our service had turned from green to red. And we hadn't been told about it. And he wasn't challenging the fact it was red, by the way. He had no challenge at all with the fact it was red. He was like, I agree, it probably is red. That's all good. But you changed it and you didn't tell us about it. and what was really cool about that story is it was the psychological safety that we've created in the team. Because my response to that was, you know what, you're absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
How rubbish was me as as a manager, as a leader within the organisation, to look at this service that you're pouring your life and soul into, by the way, is your day and your day out. And for me to pull up this scorecard, with no context as to what's going on, and in 30 seconds go, that's red, that is. And suddenly, everyone's talking about how that service is red and not understanding the context as to what's going on behind it. So he was absolutely right. Absolutely 100% right to call me out. And my response to that was, you're right. Absolutely spot on. I shouldn't have done it. But I think that really exemplifies the importance within the teams of building psychological safety. Because in that moment, I recognize my own failure, and I'm perfectly happy to do that. I'd failed as a leader in that moment. That was a big failure. I think it demonstrated the empowerment of the team to pick up on that, and it needs to be able to do that. And that feedback needs to be two ways. I think it's so important as a leader.
I absolutely love working with engineering teams. It's one of the things that I think I love the most about my job, because we have a lot of that. It's like you present something and they're like, I'd like to see the data source that came from. And then you're like, oh, I don't have one. This is what you told me. And if it's different, we can change it. And they're like, okay, just checking. It's like they're so, but it's all done in really good humor, and you're challenged, but in an intellectual way. And I think that's just what's so beautiful about working with engineers.
In a company like Haleon, where the size and scale is so complex and the business strategy is presumably set for a number of years in advance, but technology is moving at such a pace, how do you make sure that you are delivering tech against the agreed strategy, but also that innovation and all the new ways of working in the art of the possible is also feeding into the company and giving you those competitive advantages as well?
And I think the answer is it's not easy.
Yeah.
And we definitely don't 100% of the time get it right. I think we've done a pretty good job of understanding what our business need is and what our priorities are. But I think it's also important as a tech function for us to really show up as a partner to our business in a way where we also tell the business what they shouldn't be working on and what isn't the right thing to do. So, and we've done a really good effort at doing that. We call it the Haleon Digital Strategy that we launched earlier this year, which has really helped to understand what the business needs to achieve in order to be successful over the next 5-year period. I think from a technology point of view, it's really incumbent upon us as leaders to be bringing in your best practices, your thought leadership around the best way to do things, the best way to modernize, the best way to think about the technology we're building. But in order to do that successfully, I think we need to be as close to our business as we possibly can. And I mean, over the last 18 months, I've had such a phenomenal number of opportunities to go and travel and understand our markets and understand how our markets have different needs. As a technologist, it's really important for me to understand what our markets are trying to achieve, and in order to to achieve the outcomes that they need, in order to achieve their numbers and to grow, because that then means I can look at the technology and say, how can I make the technology support what you need? Otherwise, you're in a world where you're trying to say to our business, you need to understand what the technology can do, and I think that whole narrative needs to be flipped. And that's what I think we are doing a good job at Haleon of doing. I think we're really investing the time as a technology team to understand how our business drives money and trying to change our technology thinking so that we're not just a cost center, we're actually there to help the business as a profit
Drive
center.
value.
Drive value.
What is in thinking about the future, when we look out on the horizon, obviously we are all very aware of advent of AI and helping us to be more efficient as people, etc., whether it's in your personal life or in workplace. What do you look out across the technology horizon? What makes you super excited as a techie?
That's a great question. So I think AI is obviously the buzz, cutting edge word. Everyone is talking about AI, and I think what people often fail to realize is that good AI requires good data. And when you talk about agentic AI, which is probably where the conversation's currently at now, yes, the technology can do these things, but it's garbage in, garbage out. You've got poor data. You haven't got your good quality outcomes coming from your technology. So personally, I think the excitement is getting us to a world by which organizations have organized their data in a way that it can really drive meaningful data-driven outcomes. And I think very few organizations have been able to do that. I think, perhaps organizations that have been built on a modern tech stack from the ground up are probably in a better place. But we as a company have so much data, and it's very difficult to access. It's locked in core systems of record, and I think the unlock that data can give us as we learn to see what that will enable for our consumers is going to be massive. But that becomes an enabler for the AI. It's not AI itself as an outcome. It's about AI leveraging that in order to deliver an outcome. And I think it's about for the consumer really. It's about the consumer proposition that we're able to create as a result of being able to work with that technology, which is going to be able to do things that we can't even imagine yet. And I think in my own world, imagine the scenario where you can say to your AI assistant, go and book me tickets for some concert. And the AI not only books the tickets, but also works out what your travel arrangements are going to be, how you're going to get from A to B, advise you in advance if there's going to be traffic conditions that slows you down, works out what tickets you might want in the concert hall because of your personal preferences, because it knows you so well. That's the sort of personalized AI that I think we're going to get to.
God, I could really do with that.
But you can see how that's really going to drive an impact to your life once you get to that point.
100%.
But then in order for that to work, it's all going to be based on trust. And, I had a really interesting conversation probably about 18 months ago now, where I was talking to someone about, the idea of an agent or an AI, giving me healthcare advice. And I was saying, sitting here, so I'm 39, and I was saying, I'm not sure I would trust it. So if I went into my pharmacy I didn't even go to my pharmacy, I just asked my AI, I've got an itch, what should I do? And it comes back with an answer. I really struggle to trust that and to believe that it's given me the right answer. But then I was talking to somebody who was younger than me, and she said, I trust that more. Of course you trust the computer knows the answer. Whatever the computer says is right.
Yeah.
Now there's a balance between those two things, because I think we do need to be
Have they
skeptical.
grown up though with the don't Google your symptoms warning that we have grown up with? You know, I think that's probably why there's no trust, because we have been
100%.
told never Google your symptoms because you always, you know, are on verge of death.
But I think if we can bridge that gap, that trust gap that I still think exists, I think that will be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And that really is going to be a massive unlock for organisations as we see how technology.
It's not
can
going
help
to,
them
but
work.
someone who's on the pod recently, it was, I'm going to get this a touch wrong. So when the episode comes out, forgive me. Cancer identification through a doctor is about 78% at the 12-month mark. Was it the 12 or the 18 month
I can't remember
mark?
the data, but I know
It
what
was
you
the
were
12
going
or
to
the
say.
18 month mark. The records that the AI has flagged as 56%, it goes into the high 80s when a GP or clinician when a clinician reviews it. So to feed the trust argument, we're not saying that the AI is going to tell you have cancer. I think there are certain types of cancer as well that it was looking at. And we're going to tell you that you've got cancer. What it's going to allow us to do is check these records first and increase our current identification from the mid-70s to the very high 80s simply by just reviewing the ones that have been flagged by the AI. We're not taking away clinicians. We're just pointing them at stuff that they can be far more effective at. And that's
I think they've had
trust
some really
comes.
great results, specifically as well in terms of breast cancer and feeding patient records and changes of composition, like cell structures, etc. You know, like the what are they called? X-rays and things like that. They feed them in, and the AI was able to identify kind of patients who went on to develop breast cancer, and so they've used that data to then do some more training, etc. So I think that health tech aspect is incredibly interesting, because it all of a sudden, specifically here in the UK, where you know you can't get a doctor's appointment for love nor money, so all of a sudden, if you have like an AI, you know, an app or whatever it is that helps you identify your symptoms, orders something from the pharmacy for you, you know, in order to help you alleviate those symptoms, or books you an appointment at your local GP. And do you see what I mean? Like stuff like that, I think would actually be incredibly exciting for us.
I agree. I think it's about that accuracy you're talking about. But I think the interesting thing we're going to have to overcome over the next few years is the legal and moral implications that sits around that. So we all know that clinical errors occur.
Yeah.
Of course, clinical errors occur. Someone makes a mistake, and you're so if you are the clinician and you make a mistake, you are at fault for that mistake, and you can be held to account for that. So you know that you might be struck off the medical register, or you might be taken to court, or whatever might happen as a result of that clinical mistake. Who's accountable if AI makes the mistake? So the example I would use is, so we've got self-driving cars, which are being tested in San Francisco, so Waymo and all of those sorts of things. So cars coming along the road, and it has a blowout, let's say, and the driver has to make a decision. Obviously, there's some influence the driver can have over the car. And over this side of the road, you've got an elderly lady that's waiting to cross the road. Over this side of the road, you've got a group of school kids that are you're standing in the road, or you're with their teacher, kind of doing what they're doing, or maybe they're on a school bus. So do you, as the driver, steer into the elderly lady, because that's an option, or do you steer towards the group of school kids? Yeah. Now that's a choice that as a human you can make, and you can be held to account for that choice.
Yeah.
And you either make the right choice or the wrong choice. You know, and you might not have either choice, but you've got to make a choice somewhere to go either for the elderly lady or to go for the
I
school
think in that
kids.
scenario it's an impossible choice, right? Like
Of course
there
it
is
is.
definitely, it's an experiment that they did years and years
But
ago.
now you go into this world where suddenly
Yeah.
you've got an autonomous vehicle making the choice, and as society we have to get comfortable with the fact of how is that vehicle making those decisions.
What's the decision tree?
Yeah, you have to have an
somewhere in that,
explainability.
someone has
Yeah,
made
exactly.
decisions. So what is our moral
Yeah,
compass?
yeah.
And your moral compass is very difficult. My moral compass. So where is the ambiguity in that? Do you suddenly have a world where, Apple thinks you would go after the old lady, and Google thinks you would go after the school kids? How is that going to play out? And I think that is going to have to be tested in court over the coming years. To really understand that moral dimension of AI.
Yeah.
And I think that is really going to be telling. I
think that's a really fascinating topic, ethics of AI. There was I worked on a project a while back with MIT, IBM, and they were sort of set up under this school of AI, MIT IBM partnership, and was part of it. And it had 4 pillars, and one of the pillars was ethics of AI. And I haven't really followed up on it, but it was an incredibly interesting topic, and I'd be really interested to see more thought leadership on it, because that's the one thing, of course, that I'm not hearing in our industry. I'm not part of anything like that. So if anybody does know any forums, or it would be really good to understand what kind of conversations are being had at industry level around, not just can we build this stuff, but should we?
And I think that you're certainly right now. I'm not hearing very much of the should we conversation.
That's same.
There's lots of people telling me that I can do things and showing me what I can do and how the technology can enable, which is great. But I think we need to move into that ethical world to really challenge some.
Because I, for one, am not excited about autonomous cars. I'm just not. For some reason, they fill me with dread. Maybe I'm excited if I have to, I don't know, drive 6 minutes home, there's no one on the road, and like stuff like that. I'll be like, oh yeah, fair enough. But I'm not excited about that. But something like a health tech, something that sort of is an agent that helps you manage your, whether it's a long-term condition, but actually helps order things for you, or finds you the nearest slot at the nearest GP, stuff like that. I think that could be incredibly helpful for people. But autonomous cars, not so much, really. I don't care for it.
We have to accept that the world's changing quite a lot. I just, towards the end, what advice would you give people who are in that classroom who are thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure if tech's for me"? I think we're, as a society, getting much better at showing technology, but we've got to be really honest. Getting a school leaver, high further education, perhaps a little bit better. University, okay. I think that there are avenues for reasonable exposure to technology. But for people who are about to enter the world of work and maybe considering or actively considering going into tech, what advice would you give them? What skills do they need to be bringing to the table to be successful in a world where we are going to have an agent probably saying, if you have this drug, you're also on this medication, therefore we recommend this dosage, and it's not a human. In the very immediate future, therefore 10 years' time, that is most likely going to be in our home.
So I think for me, my advice would be curious.
Okay.
I think for me, curiosity is one of the most underrated skills. And I say that because I think about my own career, and you constantly reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
I went to university. I learned .NET development. I learned Swift. I learned how to program your different languages. I then developed leadership skills. I started developing finance skills when I was running my own business, and then HR skills. You're constantly learning new things, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a given of kind of where you are. And I think that the skill of just being curious and asking questions unlocks so many opportunities and so many doors. Just understanding why. There's a fantastic book, and it's cited so many times by Simon Sinek, which is Start with the Why. Why am I doing this? What is the purpose? And I think if you leverage that skill, that will open up a whole number of doors. Will open up conversations that you didn't even realize possible. Even the job that I'm doing now, I got an interview because I responded to a forum post that answered a question that somebody had because they were curious about something that was going on. So, it opens up opportunities and avenues just by linking with people, talking to people, asking questions. So for me, curiosity is the number one piece of advice I can give.
I love that. And it's written on our wall, so I couldn't agree more. I think it makes for just an interesting workplace if you have people asking. I will caveat with being authentically curious.
Yep.
As long as you're genuinely interested, it makes for a good conversation. I don't know, thank God you're not a network engineer at a school.
I know, and it was possible. I could have ended, or thank God I'm not on the West End doing performing arts. I've literally saved the world as a result of not doing that.
I mean, it's been an awesome, fascinating conversation. I think what it it's probably, if I think about it, it's highlighted a number of things. The perception of technology, I think we're very lucky in all three of our roles that we get to see it, and we know what opportunities are out there. I think we also probably have to be aware, and I'm sure we see that there are still lots of people entering it thinking it's network, it's tins, wires, it's laptops, and it's a bit of hardware on a desk, and it's so not that today. And I think by entering it in a curious way, with a genuine interest-based mindset and aptitude to learn, this industry has so many cool things to share. I think that the particular thing that I hope people take from this chat is just where it can take you. I think, from the joke around being a network manager for 400 laptops for teenagers, I'm sure it's a really cool and interesting job. But to sit and then talk around the global implications and market nuances of consumer buying in health tech, right at the bleeding edge in a warehouse, I'm pretty sure if we took that massively out of context, that could be any business leader in any organization in health tech. It just happens that your slant's technology. So I think where it can take you and the rooms it can put you in is phenomenally powerful. I was just to say thank you, because I think the honesty in which you shared around failure, I think, is super. I totally understand why you have that psychological safety, why that engineer put their hand up on Teams. Makes absolute sense. There's to sit down and share, that's really really powerful. And I think, towards the back end of the conversation around the different skills and finance, procurement, people, leadership, learning, travel, cultural nuances, finance, and then being a great .NET engineer, and I'm sure you probably don't get to do as much coding as you'd like anymore. That's been super interesting. So thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you very much for the invite. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And we would love to come back at some point.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'd love to in your office. I think it might be nicer than ours.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, thank you
very much.
No,
Cheers.
thank you.